there is a sort of weird symmetry to this, or at least a sort of weird echo. The truth is that Peter Mandelson helped build the modern Labour Party, helped create many of the leading players of the modern Labour Party, and there is a possibility that he may destroy parts, or at least some of the key players of the modern Labour Party. I wouldn't say and extend that to Keir Starmer just yet, but there's no doubt that Kemi Wade not won in PMQs because there was a fundamental force to her argument. Look, I think we need to separate a few things. It is entirely true to say, as the Prime Minister said, that he could not have known, and Morgan McSweeney and those around him could not have known, the extent of what some people are calling Peter Mandelson's treachery to his country in appearing to reportedly sending secrets almost in a kind of real-time chronicle of the latter stages of the Brown government, which could have been commercially valuable to Jeffrey Epstein, whether it's the news of the €500 billion bailout, whether it's the news of £20 billion of government asset sales. It goes on and it goes on and it goes on. Even Gordon Brown's resignation. Peter Mandelson told Jeffrey Epstein before the cabinet knew and before the rest of the country knew. Yeah. That is extraordinary. And I think it's fair to say that given as we now know that the Cabinet Office themselves have no record of those emails, it could not have been possible for the Prime Minister to know that.
Remind people why they have no record. It was because he was using his private email.
He was forwarding it, his slightly redolent, of course, of the Hillary Clinton scandal, quote unquote, of using a private email server and so on to communicate with Epstein. So we only know about all of this because of the Department of Justice, the US Department of Justice investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. Therefore, I think it's fair to say the Prime Minister could not have known that. And if he had known that, I'm sure wouldn't have appointed him. It's also true to say that the Prime Minister is probably right that he could not have known, and presumably Peter Mandelson gave certain assurances, that the nature and extent of the relationship wasn't as we now know it was, because we see from the emails that there's not just a real-time chronicle of the Brown government, but there's almost appears to be a sort of stream of consciousness between the two men. They are incredibly close. You know, Epstein calling him Petey and Mandelson saying that you're my favourite person. He could not have known also how lurid some of these communications were, talking about some of the things that we've seen just come out today, talking about Mandelson actually communicating with Epstein about his Liberation Day when he was released from prison, asking him how he was going to celebrate it, talking about the qualities of certain strippers. All of this Keir Starmer could not have known.
Hang on, can I take issue with a little bit of that?
Well, no, I'll tell you what, let me just, okay. I'm building to my climax here.
Go. Give me the what do they call it, peroration.
The peroration. But Kemi Badenoch is right about one thing, which is Keir Starmer indisputably knew that they were friends. He indisputably knew that they had a close relationship. And basically the truth is that Keir Starmer made a bet. He made a bet and a gamble and an assessment that proved to be fatally and catastrophically wrong, i.e. that he was friends just enough for it to be socially and politically acceptable to appoint him as ambassador, that Mandelson effectively could get away with it, and that he could be put in place with minimum embarrassment. As it turned out, as a result of the lurid nature of what we now know about that relationship, thanks to the files, that turned out to be catastrophically wrong. But it is indisputable that Keir Starmer knew that he was close friends with a convicted paedophile when he was appointed ambassador. And that is beyond dispute, and he cannot escape it.
And the issue I was going to take, you've half answered there anyway, because that what he did know before the appointment, long before the appointment, because of those documents from JP Morgan filed in a New York court in 2023, is that as late as 2019, Epstein and Mandelson were having what this document called a particularly close relationship, along with Prince Andrew and the Duke of York. Peter Mandelson was having that close relationship. So he knew that. A child having been sexually assaulted was not enough for him to say, that was a mistake, staying close to him, ongoing staying close to him. For Keir Starmer, that wasn't enough. The level of treachery to, I think, the country, I would use that word. I debated it yesterday whether I'd use the word traitor or treachery, but I decided I would, and I think it's going to be borne out even more once we find out more. I can't get away from, and you used an interesting term a moment ago, just yet, about what this will do to Keir Starmer. I think it arguably should and definitely could force his resignation?
I think it depends on precisely and what the contents of these documents reveal. We're now calling the sort of Mandelson files. Just to remind listeners, the debate that is going on right now in the House of Commons is a motion on this so-called humble address. This is a mechanism, a means by which the House of Commons, quite rare, happened quite a lot during the Brexit years, often employed by one Keir Starmer, no doubt, indeed, when he was Shadow Brexit Secretary. Right. But it basically compels the government to release documents for the House of Commons to see.
And that debate is happening right
now.
The
debate is happening right now. Nick Thomas-Symonds, on behalf of the government, is responding to Alex Burghardt, who is the Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. The debate that they're having, the government has already conceded that it will release some of the documents. The debate that they're having is about what exemptions there should be to the release of those documents. And the government is saying that on certain national security grounds, things that could be politically embarrassing to the UK, there may be diplomatic cables or emails and so on, they do not want released. The Conservatives want a maximal release, including emails even, between Mandelson, his special advisors when he was ambassador, email communications between Morgan McSweeney, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, and Mandelson, and the Prime Minister. And I think clearly the reason they want the scope to be as wide as possible is because the thing that the Conservatives are trying to show, or will hope to show, is that at some point, either McSweeney or the Prime Minister, ideally both, were warned in explicit terms, over and above that which the Prime Minister has hinted at, that Mandelson was a security risk, or that the relationship between he and Epstein was deep and sustained, more than the Prime Minister has suggested he knew. Now, if that can be shown in black and white, then for sure, I think for the Prime Minister, particularly if it contradicts anything he has said about this publicly, then politically I think that does become very difficult.
Or if there was an explicit warning from the security services.
Indeed so.
Feasible.
Indeed so. And there is, it all depends, and this is what Kemi Badenoch was asking in the House of Commons. And I just noticed, actually, interestingly enough, Angela Rayner, the former Deputy Leader and Deputy Prime Minister, getting to her feet. It'd be very interesting to see what she's saying.
We'll go live to the Commons in a moment, actually.
Yes, indeed. On the vetting process itself, what the nature of that was, and exactly what was revealed to the Prime Minister. That is why Kemi Badenoch keeps asking about this, because it is clearly politically dangerous for the Prime Minister.
And it was interesting to hear on Andrew Marr's show last night, people of the left of the Labour Party, people like John McDonnell, saying, we have been saying for years, and it's easy to dismiss people like John McDonnell at a moment like this, saying, oh, well, he'll wade in, he'll give him a kicking. But actually, he was making a lot of sense. He was saying, we have been saying for years, be careful what you wish for when you get up close to global money, to global finance. And politics has changed, it's changing, but the warnings were unheeded. And worse than that, according to John McDonnell, people like him on the left of the party have been turned into, or an attempt to turn them into minnows, simply because they disagree with the driving direction of the Labour Party. Does that direction have to change off the back of this?
Well, look, I think there's a sort of macro and a micro question answer to that, Sheila. The macro one is, look, in some ways, some of the revelations from these documents, they would make even the most ardent conspiracy theorist blush. If you're particularly of a leftist position, you have been warning for years about the influence of big finance, big money, and how embedded it is within our politics. Let's just take a step back. In this, we had a UK de facto deputy prime minister in a constant stream of communications with a paedophile financier who himself was talking to some of the biggest banks in the world, receiving advice from the de facto deputy prime minister to bully a Labour chancellor over a banker's bonus tax. This is exactly the sort of cartoonish way in which power actually works that we are constantly told by elites it does not work. So that's number one. The micro thing of this is, as ever, so much of this goes back to Labour Party politics. You mentioned the Labour left there. Look, there is no love lost between Labour left and Peter Mandelson. He has been their bête noire for decades. He was part of the effort, the new Labour effort that he himself put the Labour left into a sealed tomb, right? But it's not just the Labour left. The soft left of the Labour Party, who is the predominant faction at the moment in the Parliamentary Labour Party, they can smell blood. And the blood they sniff in particular is that of Morgan McSweeney's, who has been someone that has been attracting more and more attention from that part of the party. McSweeney was a close ally of Peter Mandelson.
He's the inheritor, really, isn't
If we are to believe the reporting, and I've been told this independently as well, Starmer was initially, because he had a pretty frosty relationship with Mandelson, he was initially pretty sceptical about appointing him and was prevailed to do so by Morgan McSweeney himself. The other sort of like substrand to this that I think that this debate is going to get to, and I know you're going to go to it live, Sheila, but I think the interesting thing that might come up throughout this debate is the role of the Intelligence and Security Committee. So the ISC, most people listening will never have heard of it, but it is not just a select committee, it is a statutory body in Westminster set up by the Defence and Security Act 2014. And this is basically a committee of peers and MPs who are all security cleared. They have some of the highest security clearance. Now, what is being proposed by the Conservatives, and indeed some members of that committee, is that they, if the government have security concerns, that members of that committee should vet the documents, the Mandelson documents, and they decide what can go into the public domain or not. Now, that is potentially, if someone puts an amendment down on that basis, that is something that could get quite a lot of support from Labour MPs as a compromise position, but it does mean that the government loses control of the process.
Well, that sounds like an interesting solution, shades of the Hillsborough Independent panel, and that worked.